well, I needed a distraction, so I took time to watch Black Adam. Yeah, ordinarily, I probably wouldn't have seen it this early. But as I said, it's been a rough week. So, as already stated, it's not the greatest thing since sliced bread. This is no masterpiece or anything like that. But it's probably the best superhero film of the year, which is not saying much considering your other choices were Doctor Strange and Thor, which I still haven't seen the Thor one yet. I guess I will. I've been a little busy with horror movies and stuff because it's October. But anyway, and it's pretty much a full-on action film. Once the action starts, it rarely stops. I mean, there's a few little pauses here and there. And for the most part, it's pretty cool. The thing that's lacking in it is a lot of explanation for stuff. There's a almost an adequate amount here. There's this element of ternium. There's always something ernium. And it's the MacGuffin here about they kind of work it almost like kryptonite to him in some points. But it's at the core of the plot of why Intergang is there. And Intergang, they're put as this group of mercenaries, which they are. They're basically a super duper criminal gang, and in the DC comics. And here they're shown with these super high tech weapons, and they're flying around on these flying motorcycle type sky vehicles, And it's like, well, where do they get that? They don't really go into it. They just say, hey, it's these guys, and they've basically taken over Contact, and all they want is this Eternium, and ultimately they want this crown of Sabak, which is at the heart of the story as well, which they give the background on. And the 5,000 years ago, Kondak is this mythical place. It's also extremely fictional in that there is no actual myth of that in the real world, but in the DC Comics world, it was, and that it predates Egypt and all this sort of thing. But it's kind of like it beckons to myths of lost civilizations and whatnot. So you can just throw that in the mix. But it also avoids all the nastiness one can get into when involving foreign countries that might not be so happy you did that, or groups wouldn't. And that's one of the complaints against it. It's people who just have a problem with Zaslav, really, at this point, and are all just tend to be Team Marvel for the purposes of Disney, I guess. So all the critics trashed the movie. But one of the main complaints was they're in this Middle Eastern country, but they don't really deal with Middle Eastern politics, which, having omitted that, probably adds to its success should it achieve it. Apparently, it came out of the weekend with 67 million. That's a little bit a drop from what they were hoping for, at least 70 million, but it's pretty close. So if it has legs for a second week, and then it won't matter. That'll be good enough. But it needed to do a little better than that. But anyway, so yeah, the politics isn't there. You could say it is. They talk about being oppressed from outsiders and nobody understands and all this sort of stuff. But it's really at a minimum. There were complaints about that. Oh, they didn't care about the relationship with this woman in there, Shaw from Person of Interest. And she's the woman, I thought they might do this in the movie, but they didn't. She doesn't become ISIS, but she will become that, I'm guessing, in a sequel or something like that. Or they'll just avoid it because of the name, which is stupid. But anyway, that's her character, and she and Black Adam, they become an item, but they've basically become a replacement for the family that he lost in the past. This evil king who was seeking Eternium to build the crown of Sabak so that he could have the power of 7 demons, the way that the Shazam holders have the power of, the 7 some god. Some Solomon's in there as well. He wasn't a god, but 7 good guys. And so that's basically what Sabek is. And this king was almost about to do it, but then Black Adam stopped it all. And that's how the story goes. That's this long-lost champion they want. So they set up that as their backstory. And then he appears. Well, the Justice Society is called in by Amanda Waller, as you already know by seeing the trailer, so there's not much to it there. They don't really go into any explanation of who the Justice Society are. We meet them. We see that Dr. Fate and Hawkman are old veterans of this organization, and then they got 2 young members, Cyclone and Atom Smasher. And Atom Smasher is very new to the team. And a lot of people were complaining about him. He's kind of this comic relief character, but it's kept to such a minimum that it never bothered me. He's new to the job. He's clumsy. He makes mistakes. Hawkman gets irritated with him. And that's about it. I didn't really see that was so bad that it pushed you out of the movie. I didn't see it as bad at all, really. And then there's kind of this, I think, an attraction between him and the girl. They're contemporary age, so you can understand that. But really, just not enough explanation there. And it was a bit of a letdown that they didn't use the idea of Dr. Fate in that he gets possessed by the helmet. Well, the helmet is possessed by the spirit of Nabu. And Nabu could have been in Corporal Farm, his real self, back in the days of when Black Adam got his powers. And I would have thought it would have been interesting if they had said that he was one of the original wizards of the Council of Wizards that Shazam was a member of. And so something like that. I initially had suspected that they might do a 3-part act film where it's in 3 different eras. And that Black Adam breaks out, encounters the Justice Society in the past, in the World War II era, and they defeat him, and then he breaks out again in the current era, and all that's left of the Justice Society is Dr. Fate and Hawkman, apparently, with their new recruits and that sort of thing. But there's nothing. They don't really go into it and say, hey, you haven't seen the last of the Justice Society, so okay, maybe so. But it also creates the problem for the overall DCEU, now just DCU. Apparently that's Zaslav's law. So, and DC Films is now DC Studios and all that. So, okay. But for the overall shared universe, depending on what they do with the Flash and how the Man of Steel movie fits in with this, and I know, yes, the good news is there will be new Superman movies with Henry Cavill, but that's been a lingering problem where you had this devastating threat to the planet and the humanity from the Kryptonians, and Superman saved the day in that movie, but he did it by himself. The only thing they did was in the Batman vs. Superman was to show that Bruce Wayne was there in Metropolis trying to save, his guy there, Jack, whoever he was. But in Wonder Woman, she shows up in Batman vs. Superman, and there's no explanation as to why she didn't show up in that, which is far more serious a threat than what she was facing with Doomsday. Because they had this, world terraforming machine. It's going to wipe everything out. And then here we have now the Justice Society, who've been sitting around on their laurels and didn't do anything. So you do some explanation that they were fighting some magic menace in another dimension or something and weren't there. So you could do that. Could have done that for Wonder Woman as well, But it's got to be something. Or they're just going to say, well, it didn't happen that way anymore. Man of Steel no longer exists because of time warp shenanigans from the Flash film. But this is Black Adam. The Flash film hasn't happened yet. Or you can say, it reverberates through time. Yeah. So that's always been a bit lazy. They've never addressed it. And you got to tighten that up. When you have something that massive right out the gate, which is what they did with Man of Steel, and they just forget about it. So, Black Adam was a villain in the original Captain Marvel comics, and but some time ago they started changing that. With the idea that why would Shazam pick a guy who becomes a villain was that, well, he didn't know that he would be. He thought he saw potential in the man. So you take it that he's a harsher, darker guy. He suffered some terrible loss, and he's angry and bitter about that. And if you cross him, he kills you, and that's his take on it. And that's why superheroes like Hawkman have a problem with him. That's just, that's the wrong philosophy or what have you. So it sets up an interesting back and forth between them, that he's not just totally a villain in that aspect. He's approached as a villain by the Justice Society here, but then, they begin to understand. Dr. Fate takes a pretty harsh turn to it. He tells him to kneel before them. But that's the voice of Nabu demanding that he obey. You weren't really in that position, and all that did was stir him up, thinking that if he would respect a harsh approach, maybe, I don't know. But again, that's some of the flaws in it. It's not fleshed out enough as to what the thinking was. They were there to contain him and have him captured, and the idea was to get him to say Shazam, and then he's weak and powerless, and you can capture him. But ultimately, that does happen. They convince him to do this, and he does it, and he submits to being captured because he's ashamed, because it turns out the real Wizards champion was actually his son. But his son decided to transfer the power to his father, and it got him killed by the king's assassins. And so then Black Adam just slaughters the king in his court and everything, and the Wizards are like, oh my God, we got to contain this guy. And so that's how he ended up in locked in suspended animation in the tomb, gets freed, by Intergang and all that. And so now he has his new family that he cares about and all that. But the reason, that shame of that he wasn't as good a man as he should have been, his son was the real hero and all that. And he was probably too good for his own good. And that sort of thing. So they lock him up. Well, meanwhile, Sabak happens. One of the guys from Intergang, he knew what it was. He was a descendant from the king, and he's been waiting for this moment all his life, and he achieves it. And so Dr. Fate has to reach out to Black Adam to break out of his prison that Amanda Waller put him in, which he does. There's a brief cameo by the James Gunn's wife now, the blonde lady from Peacemaker. Yeah, see, it's all the same world. And it's a long-winded thing for him to get out, and it's almost, that's too much, because he has to, the base that he was in was underwater, I guess under the ocean or whatever, and he escapes and has to swim up to the surface to say Shazam. I don't think he would have made it. Plus, some of the guards shot him on the way out, But once he does, his suit's all nice and shiny and gold and stuff, and he gets his cape back and all that. And then he goes to fight Sabak. And Hawkman and Black Adam take him on, and they outfox him and destroy him. And Black Adam splits him in half, because that's how he rolls. And at that point, Hawkman didn't really have that much of a problem with that kill. Dr. Fate meets his fate, which I expected, because I think they're going to pass it on to Khalid in any future Justice Society involvement. So, he's a magic being, so perhaps Kent Nelson could show up again. But apparently he saw the future, and Hawkman was going to die at the end of this battle, so he just chose to change it to where he dies instead, and that's what happened. Sabak kills him, and all that, and the helmet disappears, but it'll show up again to choose a new host, and that'll be Khalid. So anyway, the big flaw there for me is they didn't do enough explanation for who these people are. I thought a few lines of dialogue here and there could have done that. I thought it was a missed opportunity for Nabu to appear with Shazam. Shazam's in it, but it's very brief with a bunch of other wizards. You don't know much about it. And that's it. And then you jump into the action, which is fine and all. And maybe there was, I know this thing was reshot, and I think there's a lot of stuff on the cutting room floor, which probably was stuff from the previous regime and probably did have some politics in it and that kind of crap that would have turned people off. And you're in no position to do that. So this is the one you get, and they cut it down and fixed it up to be this all-out action movie, which, a rock movie, it's appropriate. So he's got his new family. He's in contact, and then Amanda Waller sends him a message saying, all right, contact's yours, but you don't leave it. You stay in there. And then he gives the line, nobody on this planet can stop me. And she says, well, I know people who are not from this planet. So she's doing this through a projection from a drone that she sent. And so he zaps the drone, blows it up, and there's all this smoke, and suddenly this shadowy figure lands and walks through the smoke, and ta-da, it's you, a man. And that's the scene where we need to talk. So, probably to deliver the same message. You get out of hand, I'm here to slap you down. And so eventually, yes, there will be a Superman versus Black Adam film. They kept teasing it throughout because there were the kid that's in the story. He's a superhero fan, and he's got posters of Superman on his wall, and Black Adam zaps it. Not intentionally, but, stuff like that. So, all in all, it's a fun film in that aspect. And, of course, it could have been better here and there. But some people say, this is the worst DC film. No, no. Oh, no. No, not by a long shot. So, look, it's going to be beloved because it brought Superman back. And, that's a big boost for it. It's difficult for a film like this to stand on its own with characters the average moviegoer knows nothing about. For a guy who knows a lot about DC like me, it was cool to see, especially Dr. Fate, show up in this and all of that. But that's not going to go very far with the overall movie-going audience. So Superman kind of had to come in and save the day, and they managed to do that. And the idiocy of the previous regime, trying to shut that down just over Henry Cavill or whatever, just goes to show you why things are so bad when the top is so very, very stupid. And in some cases, I defended Hamada because he got a lot of blame for stuff he had nothing to do with. But this is on him, the last holdout. And especially he's the one who had the idiot line of, he wanted J.J. Abrams to do for DC what he had done for Star Trek. Well, if that doesn't tell you all, doesn't it? Yeah. In the meanwhile, I got the news that, yes, James Gunn is in charge. He's the creative boss, whereas Peter Safran, I believe, his name does sound familiar. I think he had some involvement with Aquaman and one of the other films. But anyway, he'll be the business side, which is actually a good idea if he just sticks to what he knows and does the businesses, what makes money and what doesn't. And both have to report to Zaslav. And James Gunn is on the creative end. So we'll see what happens there.